The sold sign in front of our family home didn't shock me. What shocked me was that my stepmother thought this was legal. When my father died, he'd left me an envelope. The document inside was about to change Gloria's life, for the worse. My name is Daniel Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, and I'd been living in the same house in suburban Denver for 23 years. Not as a freeloader or a failure to launch, I'd been taking care of my father through his final battle with cancer, managing his medical appointments, and maintaining the property that had been in our family for 3 generations. The house at 1247 Maple Street wasn't just a building. It was where my grandfather had raised 5 kids during the Depression, where my father had brought my mother as a newlywed, and where I'd taken my first steps in the living room that Gloria now apparently believed she owned. But Gloria Walsh Mitchell, my father's wife of 8 years, had never understood the house's history. To her, it was just real estate, a valuable asset in Denver's booming housing market that she could convert into cash for her retirement plans in Florida. The envelope my father had given me 3 months before he died was tucked away in my bedroom safe, waiting for exactly this moment. He'd handed it to me on a Tuesday afternoon while Gloria was at her book club, his voice weak, but his mind sharp as ever. "Danny," he'd said, using the childhood nickname he'd never stopped calling me. "When I'm gone, Gloria's going to try to sell this house. She thinks it's community property because we're married, but there are things she doesn't know, things I never told her." I'd started to protest, to tell him he wasn't going anywhere, but he'd raised a hand to stop me. "Listen carefully. In my desk drawer, there's a legal document dated 3 years before I married Gloria. It transfers ownership of this house to you with a life estate for me. That means when I die, the house is yours completely. Gloria has no claim to it whatsoever." "Dad, why didn't you tell her?" He'd smiled sadly. "Because I wanted to see who she really was. If she tried to kick you out or sell what wasn't hers, I'd have my answer about her character." Now, standing in the driveway looking at that sold sign, I had Dad's answer, and Gloria was about to get hers. To understand how we got here, I need to explain how Gloria entered our lives. My mother, Sarah, died when I was 11, a car accident that shattered our family and left Dad and me to figure out how to navigate life without the woman who'd been our anchor. For 6 years, it was just us. Dad worked as a mechanical engineer for a defense contractor, and I learned to cook basic meals, do laundry, and keep house while staying on top of my schoolwork. We weren't just father and son. We were a team, survivors who'd learned to depend on each other. Dad met Gloria at a grief counseling group when I was 17 and about to start my senior year of high school. She was recently divorced, in her late 40s, with grown children who lived in other states. She seemed kind enough, bringing casseroles to our house and laughing at Dad's terrible jokes. I was cautiously optimistic when they started dating. Dad deserved happiness, and Gloria seemed to make him smile in ways I hadn't seen since Mom died. When they got engaged after 2 years of dating, I was genuinely supportive. The wedding was small, just close family and a few friends in the backyard of our house. Gloria moved in gradually, bringing her furniture and redecorating bit by bit. She was careful not to erase Mom's presence entirely, keeping family photos and some of Mom's favorite things, which I appreciated. For the first few years, things worked well enough. Gloria had her routines, book club, yoga classes, volunteer work at the animal shelter. Dad had his workshop in the garage and his weekend projects around the house. I finished high school, went to college locally, and moved back home after graduation to save money while building my career in graphic design. The problems started subtly. Comments about how I was too comfortable living at home, suggestions that maybe it was time for me to spread my wings. Nothing overtly hostile, just persistent hints that my presence in the family home wasn't part of Gloria's long-term vision. When Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 3 years ago, everything changed. Suddenly, my presence went from being merely tolerated to being desperately needed. Dad required constant care, medication schedules, doctor's appointments, help with basic tasks as his strength declined. Gloria tried to be supportive, but she wasn't built for caregiving. The sight of Dad's weakness seemed to frighten her, and she spent more time away from the house, extending her volunteer hours and taking frequent trips to visit her children in other states. I stepped into the caregiver role naturally. I'd already been working mostly freelance, so I could adjust my schedule around Dad's needs. I drove him to treatments, managed his medications, and provided the emotional support he needed during the hardest fight of his life. It was during one of Gloria's extended visits to her daughter in Phoenix that Dad had the conversation with me about the house and the envelope. "Danny, I need you to understand something," he'd said as we sat on the back porch, watching the sunset over the mountains that had always been his favorite view. "When your mother and I bought this house, we put it in both our names. When she died, her half passed to me automatically." "I remember the paperwork," I'd said. "You had me help you organize all the legal documents." "Right. But what you didn't know is that 3 years before I married Gloria, I had my lawyer draft a deed transferring the house to you, with me retaining a life estate. That means I could live here until I died, but ownership would pass to you immediately upon my death." I'd been confused. "Why didn't you just leave it to me in your will?" "Because wills can be contested, and community property laws are complicated. This way, there's no ambiguity. The house was never part of my marital assets with Gloria because I didn't own it anymore. You did." "Does Gloria know?" Dad had shaken his head. "I wanted to see how she'd treat you after I was gone. If she tried to claim what wasn't hers, I'd know her true character. And if she tries to sell, then you show her the deed, and she learns a very expensive lesson about making assumptions." Dad died on a Thursday morning in November, quietly and peacefully in his sleep. The previous evening, he'd reminded me one last time about the envelope in my bedroom safe. "Don't let her push you around, Danny," he'd whispered. "This house is your inheritance from 3 generations of Mitchell men. Don't let anyone take that away from you." The funeral was sad but beautiful. Dad had planned most of it himself, choosing readings and music that reflected his love for our family and the house where he'd spent 43 years of his life. Gloria played the grieving widow perfectly, accepting condolences and support from neighbors and friends. For the first month after Dad's death, Gloria and I coexisted peacefully enough. We were both processing grief, and the house felt too empty and quiet without Dad's presence. Gloria spent time organizing his personal effects, and I handled the practical matters: insurance claims, utility transfers, and maintaining the property. The first sign of trouble came when Gloria suggested I might want to find my own place so she could have privacy to grieve properly. "I understand this is hard for you too," she'd said over dinner one evening, "but it might be healthier for both of us if we had some space. I'm thinking of renting out the guest room to help with expenses." I'd nodded politely but didn't commit to anything. The house was large enough for both of us, and I'd been contributing to household expenses and maintenance for years. There was no practical reason for me to leave. The second sign came when Gloria started having real estate agents over to appraise the property for insurance purposes. I'd catch her walking through rooms with strangers, pointing out features and discussing market values. When I asked her about it, she'd been vague. "Just getting a sense of our assets, dear. Financial planning, you know." But I knew. Gloria was planning to sell the house, assuming she'd inherited it as community property from her marriage to Dad. She was preparing to cash out and move to Florida, leaving me homeless and without the inheritance that was rightfully mine. The confrontation came exactly 6 weeks after Dad's funeral. I was working in my home office when Gloria knocked on my door, holding official-looking documents. "Daniel, we need to talk," she'd said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I've made a decision about the house." "What kind of decision?" "I'm selling it. The market is excellent right now, and I've received a very good offer from a young family who wants to move in quickly." I'd felt my stomach drop, even though I'd been expecting this. "Gloria, I don't think you can just sell the house without consulting me. I live here too." "Dear, I know this is hard to hear, but the house belongs to me now. It was community property from my marriage to your father. I have every legal right to sell it. Have you consulted with Dad's lawyer about this?" Her expression had tightened slightly. "I don't need to consult with anyone. The house is mine and I'm selling it. You have 60 days to find other arrangements." That night, I'd opened Dad's envelope and read the deed transfer document for the 10th time. The language was clear and unambiguous. Ownership of 1247 Maple Street had been transferred to Daniel James Mitchell 3 years before Dad's marriage to Gloria Walsh. The house had never been community property because Dad no longer owned it. I'd also found a letter from Dad, written in his careful handwriting just weeks before he died. Danny, if you're reading this, Gloria has shown her true colors. She's trying to sell what was never hers to begin with. Don't feel bad about what happens next. A person who would make their stepson homeless to fund their retirement doesn't deserve consideration or sympathy. Protect what's yours, son. I made sure you'd have the tools to do it. Love, Dad. The next morning, I'd called Robert Thompson, Dad's lawyer, and explained the situation. I was wondering when this call would come, Thompson had said. Your father predicted this would happen. Do you have the deed documents he left for you? Yes, all of them. Good. Don't engage with Gloria directly about this yet. Let me handle the legal communication. This is going to be a shock to her system, and these situations can get ugly quickly. Thompson was right about the shock. When he sent Gloria the registered letter explaining that she had no legal right to sell the property, her reaction was immediate and explosive. She'd stormed into my office waving the letter, her face red with anger. What is this? What have you done? I haven't done anything, Gloria. Dad transferred ownership of the house to me years before you were married. You never had any legal claim to it. That's impossible. I lived here for 8 years. I'm his widow. Living somewhere doesn't create ownership rights, and being Dad's widow doesn't give you claim to property he didn't own at the time of his death. Your father would never do this to me. Never. I'd pulled out Dad's letter and handed it to her. Watching her read it was like watching someone's world collapse in real time. The color drained from her face, and her hands shook as she realized the implications. This is fraud, she'd whispered finally. He tricked me. He let me believe. He let you believe what you chose to believe, I'd corrected. He never told you the house was community property. You assumed it was. I won't accept this. I'll contest it in court. That's your right. But Thompson says the deed transfer is bulletproof. You'll lose, and you'll end up paying legal fees for both sides. That's when Gloria made her biggest mistake. Instead of accepting the situation and working with me to find a reasonable solution, she decided to escalate. Over the next week, she contacted every family member and friend she could reach, telling them I was stealing her inheritance and making her homeless. She painted herself as the victim of a cruel stepson who was exploiting legal technicalities to rob a grieving widow. The campaign worked with some people. I received angry calls from Gloria's daughter in Phoenix and her sister in Milwaukee, both demanding I do the right thing and let Gloria sell the house. But Gloria had made a critical error in her victim narrative. She'd forgotten that many of these same family members and friends knew the real story of the past 3 years. They knew who had sacrificed their own life to care for Dad during his illness. They knew who had been maintaining the house and paying the bills, and they knew who had been planning to move to Florida even before Dad died. The conversation with Gloria's daughter, Angela, was particularly revealing. Daniel, my mother says you're forcing her out of her own home, Angela had said when she called. Angela, the house was never your mother's. It was transferred to me years before she married Dad. But she's been living there. She has rights. She has the right to continue living here as long as she wants. I've never asked her to leave. She's the one who decided to sell. Silence. Then, what do you mean continue living there? I mean she can stay in the house indefinitely. I'm not evicting her. I'm just preventing her from selling property that isn't hers. Another pause. She told me you were making her homeless. Angela, your mother's been planning to move to Florida since before Dad died. She's been talking about retirement communities and warm weather for months. The only thing that's changed is that she can't fund that move by selling my inheritance. The call ended awkwardly, but I could tell Angela was starting to understand the real situation. The turning point came when Gloria hired her own lawyer, Richard Stevens, a flashy attorney who advertised on late-night television and promised to fight for your rights against family greed. Stevens had apparently taken the case without thoroughly reviewing the documentation, assuming it was a standard inheritance dispute he could settle quickly. When Thompson sent him copies of the deed transfer and supporting documents, Stevens's tune changed dramatically. The meeting in Thompson's office was tense but brief. Stevens had arrived with Gloria, both of them confident they could intimidate me into a settlement. They left 30 minutes later looking shell-shocked. Mrs. Mitchell, Thompson had explained patiently, Your stepson owns this house free and clear. The transfer was completed and recorded 3 years before your marriage. There is no community property claim because the property was never owned by your husband during your marriage." "But I didn't know," Gloria had protested. "He should have told me." "Legal property ownership doesn't require spousal notification when it predates the marriage," Stevens had said quietly, reading through the documents. "This deed transfer is completely valid." "So I get nothing?" "You get to continue living in the house as long as Daniel permits it," Thompson had replied. "You have no ownership rights, but you haven't been evicted either." After they left, Thompson had turned to me with a slight smile. "Your father was a smart man, Daniel." This deed transfer was perfectly executed. Gloria has no legal recourse whatsoever. What happens now? That depends on Gloria. She can accept the situation gracefully and continue living here, or she can make both your lives miserable by fighting a battle she can't win. Gloria chose the latter. Over the next month, she made living in the house as difficult as possible. She changed the locks on the main entrance, forcing me to use the side door. She removed family photos and furniture from common areas, packing them away in her bedroom. She stopped contributing to household expenses and utility bills. Most petty of all, she began showing the house to potential buyers, despite having no legal authority to sell it. When I confronted her about this, she claimed she was exploring all her options and getting second opinions on property values. The situation came to a head when Gloria actually accepted an offer from a young couple who wanted to buy the house. She signed a purchase agreement for $485,000 and scheduled a closing date 6 weeks out. That's when I had to play the final card Dad had left me. I contacted the buyers directly, explaining that the person they were dealing with didn't actually own the property and had no authority to sell it. I provided them with copies of the deed documents and Thompson's contact information for verification. The buyers were understandably upset. They'd been house hunting for months, had fallen in love with the property, and had already started making moving arrangements. But they were also smart enough to understand they couldn't buy a house from someone who didn't own it. Their lawyer contacted Gloria's lawyer, demanding an explanation. Stevens tried to bluff his way through, claiming the ownership issue was still being resolved, but eventually had to admit that his client had no legal standing to sell the property. The sale fell through, of course. The buyers demanded return of their earnest money and threatened to sue Gloria for fraud. Stevens quietly withdrew from representing her, leaving Gloria to face the consequences alone. That's when she finally broke down and agreed to talk. We met in the kitchen where Dad had eaten breakfast every morning for 43 years, where Mom had taught me to make pancakes, where 3 generations of Mitchell family memories lived in every cabinet and corner. "I don't understand how this happened," Gloria said, tears in her eyes. "Your father and I were married. I thought we shared everything." "You shared a life," I replied, "but Dad made sure the house would stay in the family where it belonged." "So what am I supposed to do? I can't afford to retire without the money from selling this house." It was a fair question, and despite everything she'd put me through, I didn't want to see her genuinely suffer. "Gloria, you can live here as long as you want. You don't pay rent and you share expenses like always. That saves you thousands of dollars a year." "But I want to move to Florida. I want to be near Angela and the grandchildren." "Then you'll have to find another way to fund that move. Maybe sell your car and buy something less expensive. Maybe take a part-time job. Maybe ask Angela to help." "That's not the retirement I planned." "Plans change," I said, thinking about all the plans I'd changed to take care of Dad during his illness. "Sometimes we have to adapt." Gloria stayed in the house for another 3 months, but the dynamic had permanently shifted. She knew she had no leverage, no ownership claim, and no legal recourse. She was living there by my goodwill, not by right. Eventually, she found a small apartment across town that she could afford on Dad's pension and Social Security. She moved out gradually, taking her personal belongings and the furniture she'd brought to the marriage, leaving behind the pieces that had always belonged to the house. The day she left, she stopped by my office to say goodbye. "Daniel, I want you to know I'm not proud of how I handled this," she said. "I was scared about my future, and I thought selling the house was my only option." "I understand, Gloria, but trying to sell what wasn't yours wasn't the answer. Your father was a good man, but he was also a clever one. I think he knew exactly what I would do. She was right, of course. Dad had read Gloria's character perfectly and had protected my inheritance accordingly. He'd given her every opportunity to prove him wrong, to show that she valued family over financial gain. She'd failed that test. 6 months later, I was still living in the house at 1247 Maple Street, but now it truly felt like mine. I'd repainted the living room, updated the kitchen appliances, and started a garden in the backyard that would have made Dad proud. Gloria sent Christmas cards and the occasional email with updates about her new life. She'd found part-time work at a veterinary clinic and was volunteering with a senior center's pet therapy program. She seemed to be making the best of her situation, though I knew she still resented losing what she'd never actually owned. The real validation came when Angela visited Denver for a business conference and asked to see the house. "I owe you an apology," she said as we sat on the back porch where Dad had loved to watch the sunset. "When this all started, I thought you were being cruel to my mother. And now? Now I understand that she was trying to sell your inheritance to fund her retirement. That's not right, no matter how you look at it." Angela had talked to her mother extensively about the situation and had learned details Gloria had omitted from her original victim narrative, like the fact that I'd never asked her to leave, that I'd been supporting Dad through his illness while Gloria traveled, and that the house had been in my family for 3 generations. Mom has a tendency to see herself as the victim in situations where she's made poor choices, Angela admitted. She did the same thing during her divorce from my father. I'm glad she's doing well in her new apartment. She is. And honestly, I think she's happier being independent again. Living in your house was probably a constant reminder that she didn't belong to your family the way she wanted to. That insight stayed with me. Gloria had never been content being a stepmother and stepwife. She'd wanted to erase the past and create a new family narrative with herself at the center. The house, with its decades of Mitchell family history, had been a barrier to that vision. Dad had understood this about her, which is why he'd been so careful to protect what mattered most. Not just the financial value of the property, but the continuity of family, the preservation of memory, and the security of knowing that home would always be home. A year after Gloria moved out, I met Jennifer, a graphic designer who shared my love of old houses and family history. When I told her the story of the backup plan and the hidden deed, she laughed and said, "Your father sounds like he was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers." She was right. Dad had seen 5 moves ahead, anticipating exactly how events would unfold and positioning me to protect what was mine. He'd given Gloria every chance to prove her character, and when she failed that test, his contingency plan activated perfectly. When Jennifer and I got engaged, we talked about the future of the house. We could modernize it, expand it, maybe add children to carry on another generation of family memories. The house would continue to evolve, but its foundation, both literal and metaphorical, would remain strong. Sometimes I think about the lesson Dad was trying to teach me. It wasn't just about property ownership or legal protection. It was about understanding people's true motivations, about the difference between what someone says and what they do when tested. Gloria had played the role of loving stepmother and devoted wife, but when the stakes were raised, her actions revealed her priorities. She was willing to make her stepson homeless to fund her retirement. She was willing to sell a family legacy for personal gain. She was willing to fight dirty when she didn't get what she wanted. Dad had seen all of this coming and had protected me accordingly. Not with anger or confrontation, but with careful planning and legal documentation. The backup plan wasn't about revenge. It was about preservation. As I write this, sitting in Dad's old study overlooking the garden where he taught me to plant tomatoes, I'm grateful for his foresight. The "Sold" sign is long gone from our front yard, replaced by a new mailbox with Mitchell painted in bold letters. The house is exactly where it belongs, with exactly who belongs in it. Sometimes the best defense against betrayal isn't conflict, it's preparation. And sometimes the most important lesson a father can teach his son is that trust should be earned, not assumed, and that the people who truly care about you will never ask you to give up what rightfully belongs to you. The backup plan worked perfectly because the man who designed it understood that protecting family means more than just being nice to people who claim to love you. It means ensuring that love is backed up by actions, that loyalty is proven over time, and that when push comes to shove, the people who matter most will choose family over profit. Gloria learned that lesson the hard way, but thanks to Dad's wisdom, I learned it without losing anything that mattered.